This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Hague.
I just threw everything in, Tim. Entropy. I mean, what a concept to describe our lives. Men, to a large extent, are horrible and stupid.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
We have a debut novel in front of us today. It is Decoherence by Chris Kirkham. Chris, thank you for joining us on the Books Podcast.
Oh, a great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's clear up one detail before we start. A couple of years ago, we talked to one Tom Kirkham about his memoir, Pop Life. Apparently, it was actually he who drew my attention to your novel, Cards on the Table, Relationship.
Yeah, well, Tom is my son, and he's writing something else. And until this pandemic came along, he was actually in negotiations with a publisher. But obviously, publishing is, sort of on the shelf at the moment, especially for small publishers.
So, Decoherence, subtitle A Quantum Whodunit. And that's highly significant. Our hero, Sirius Peabody, is a theoretical physicist, and you are not, in fact, a theoretical physicist. Are you just showing off?
There is an element of showing off. There's an element that I studied literature at university, and for most of my adult life, read the great classics, the great rubbish, a lot of history, a bit of philosophy, and the kind of typical liberal arts reading list that a liberal arts student and a journalist, as I am by profession, would read. A lot of politics as well was in there. Guardian reader, the kind of thing, the kind of books and films that Guardian recommends. Recently, 4 or 5 years ago, through a process almost of osmosis, I found myself reading lots of books about physics, in particular quantum physics. I mean, I read 20 to 30 books, and as I was reading them and trying to grapple with the concepts that lay therein, the idea of writing something that expressed a long-held ambition to write a novel, but also brought out this feeling that I have that, physics explains everything. Whether you're a determinist, a behavioralist, a scientist, a religious person, or whatever, physics, broadly speaking, has an answer for most of it. And we have become accustomed to thinking of life in terms of liberal arts metaphors. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Whereas, why not shall I compare thee to a neutrino generated by fusion within the heart of a star? So I'm just getting ideas that physics, and as I keep saying, quantum physics, lies at the heart not just of the physical world, but our experience of it. And I just wanted to give it a go. So, yeah, there's a bit of showing off, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was that the big idea for the book? And clearly it was, because Peabody thinks that we should all be more familiar with quantum physics than we are. And I think he might have a point. So the basis of the book is that Peabody's professional way of looking at the world would be the way that he approached the investigation. Not only does he use the language of quantum physics to spice up the prose and the dialogue, but the actual understanding, the things that you've been looking at for 5 years, also governs the way that he sees the mystery. I think you pull this off quite effectively. I wonder, do you think that the theoretical physics might be a barrier to any of the readers?
Do you know, one of the editors who was going through the process of taking out all the typos in my book actually put a note to the publisher who'd accepted it and said, do you think there might not be a bit too much physics, and should we get a scientist to proofread it?
It would have been a much shorter book.
Yeah, and my publisher, Lisa Wallace, sent me an email saying, I don't know what you think about this. In my view, there's just enough physics to make it a book that you could arguably say has a large amount of quantum physics in it. And do you think the science holds up? My reply was, you would kill it if you took the physics out, because you would kill the main character and his worldview. And secondly, I am reasonably confident within the bounds of scientific discovery, which is going on all the time, that the physics holds up. And I did take a great deal of care in the descriptions of quantum processes to make sure that at the time of writing, that was broadly speaking the general view. I don't claim that it's, that every physicist in the country would say, oh yeah, Kirkham's got that bang on, but I do claim that the general thrust of the ideas underlying these concepts is as accurate as I could possibly, as a layman, make them.
Well, as it happens, I've had much the same experience as you had, which is a lifetime of not really understanding anything and then getting very interested in, quantum physics again over the past 5 years or so. So, and I was very happy with it. I think you know a little bit more of it than me, but I wasn't unhappy with any of it. That said, we run the risk of suggesting that it's incredibly dense and difficult, which it isn't. In fact, the book is great fun. It's very funny, and it rattles along. It's in some way, except for the substrate of physics, it's a pretty old-fashioned murder mystery. In fact, it looks back to the golden age of murder mysteries, doesn't it? It's got a heightened cast list. It's got lively dialogue, which I think you worked quite hard on, and also there is a whodunit. There is a killer who we know. He's a character we already know by the end of it. So there's no cheating in that way. You set out to write a fun, old-fashioned whodunit as well.
Well, that was many years ago. A friend of mine and I decided that the way to make a large amount of money was to write a traditional thriller or a whodunit that had, 10 chapters, a mini climax at the end of every chapter, probably with a body involved, and a final chapter in which the Poirot figure gathers all the suspects together and goes through them one at a time before the big reveal at the end. My friend and I failed abjectly to agree on any aspect of plot, character, who did it, male, female, detective, or anything. But it's an idea that had kind of stuck with me, as an exercise. I've read Agatha Christie, I've read Morse, I've read all of them, and the ability to actually surprise you at any point is something that I think they really succeed at. You can say that Christie's characters are ciphers. You can say that Morse is far too grumpy and unhappy in love and whatever, but they still have this ability to surprise. Now, when I was writing it as a whodunit, the hardest part is trying to figure out who did it. And the techniques that I employ, I see as sleight of hand. Whenever I felt that I was getting either too close to giving too much away or too far away from the plot, I tried to throw in distractions involving the characters. And as I threw those distractions in, the novel sort of bulked up. So, there's a visit to one of my favourite places on earth, which is Nice.
Which is also one of Sirius's favourite places on Earth.
Yes, I mean, I was assuming you were going to ask me a question later on in this interview about the main character and the autobiographical element. But what I would say is that I threw that in as a distraction to try and lure people away from actually thinking, could that person have done it? Could that person have done it? And try and lure them into a nice little sideline. But it's still fundamentally, 7 or 8 characters, murder, suspects, who did it, And I tried to make it funny. I mean, I wanted it to be funny.
It is funny, yes.
Good.
But you also want to make it fun. You've got a cast list with a whole bunch of fruity names. You've got Sirius Peabody and Eleanor Woodcote and Vernon Godlim so again you've set it largely in a university. There's a sort of touch of the Malcolm Bradburys or David Lodges there as well. You're looking back as well to all these templates.
Yes, I took a great deal of trouble over the names and really enjoyed myself in conjuring them up. So Godling is a reference to the Higgs boson, which Peter Higgs got a Nobel Prize for several years ago, and it's known as the God particle. So I put that character in. Moriarty is obviously a steal.
And she's a Professor Moriarty. She's a professor of physics.
I know. Yeah. I enjoyed that. Bronte, the Bronte sisters. Eleanor Woodcote is, Jane Austen, obviously. Eleanor from Sense and Sensibility, and Woodhouse from Emma Woodhouse. John Walk was this very odd-looking Ipswich town footballer from the 70s whose name just happens to rhyme with quark. And I enjoyed I enjoyed the names. Bartlesby. There are loads of references. I just threw everything in, Tim. I tended to throw in all the things that over the years have interested me in all areas. So aspects of my own personality and my own tendency to rant about certain things. I love the notion of an unreliable narrator.
Although he does insist that he is a reliable narrator, and then later on concedes that perhaps he's not.
Yes, but that's about the technique of novel writing, isn't it? How much do you reveal and how much do you hide? And obviously the greatest unreliable narrator is probably in The Death of Roger Ackroyd. But the one that makes me almost weep with laughter is in The Good Soldier. That man is such an idiot that I burst out laughing when I read The Good Soldier. And I just had these ideas, they were just buzzing around. And in the end, I just thought, throw them in.
You touched earlier on the relationship, the central relationship in the book, which is between Sirius Peabody, our hero, and another physicist, Annabel Bronte, who's a sister. So you have the Bronte sisters, of course. Now, the point about this relationship, which is a delicate one. Peabody's about to be 60. Annabel is 30, beautiful, clever, witty. And there was a time in writing, and especially on television or movies, when these two would have found themselves in bed together, at least if the author was a man. You were aiming for something slightly more grown up, were you? There's a sort of elegiac note to the ruminations on love and age and the relationship between them.
Peabody is meant to be a sad sack, someone whose career never quite took off, someone whose marriage ended in failure, mainly one gathers through his own fault. he suffers not just these kind of personal elements of failure, but he suffers from the male failure to come to terms with the world as it's changed, and probably should never have been the way it was anyway, but it's certainly changed. So he's the kind of person who is attracted by looks and figures, and
Or
thinks of him.
a man, to use the simple term.
Yeah. I mean, men to a large extent are horrible and stupid, and not as intelligent as they think they are, rarely as good looking or as sprightly as they think they are. And I tried to get in this element that he starts off spotting her across a room and thinking, oh, there's a attractive looking young woman. I'll hold my tummy in and I'll go across and be witty. And I did try. I'm not convinced I was 100% successful, but I did try and introduce an element whereby he gets to realize that a friend is more important than a conquest. And, I think the elements of the book that are successful or more successful are the dialogue, which, as you said, I took a lot of time over, and his character, just his dawning realization that, there's less time in front of him than behind him. If there's an element that a critic was to point at me and say, yeah, but she's just an ideal character. You've just, it's just wish fulfillment and fantasy of a person your age. He is this bright and beautiful and witty and, sexy and flirty, blah, blah, blah. I plead guilty. It's the first time I've managed to write a book that has gone through a process of editing. I sent it to a number of publishers when I'd finished it, and I got a number of offers of contracts. So I felt reasonably satisfied that people who don't know me and aren't related to me were actually saying, yeah, we'll publish it. It's just that most of the publishers wanted money from me to publish it, whereas, they're called partnerships now. You pay a couple of grand and they pay a couple of grand and it gets published. Whereas the one who did publish it didn't want money from me. And so that was such a huge, sense of satisfaction that somebody that I didn't know had actually read it and quite liked it, that, I had no issue going with her. But like I said, circling back after a long digression, if somebody said, you can't write women characters because you're not a woman, I actually have to agree, A, that I'm not a woman, and B, that I maybe can't write women characters. One of the reasons it's in the first person, and I toyed with the idea of doing it in the third person, was that I doubted my ability to actually do a chapter that was based on a lady and get it right. Equally, the reason that the police play a fairly minor role in this is I doubted my ability to actually capture the kind of forensics and the processes that the police, especially nowadays with all the technology they have at their disposal, I just don't know enough about it. So I thought to have this kind of random amateur lumbering around and putting his foot in it he gets it wrong. I mean, you've got to realize this. He does apply quantum physics to the mystery and basically is wrong on every occasion.
Well, You say that you're worried about writing women. I think the way you've addressed that is that you give a lot of sparkling dialogue. We talked about the dialogue earlier on. There are some very good gags. With Sirius and Annabelle, you've gone sort of Nick and Nora Charles, haven't you? Sort of screwball comedy, glittering dialogue. There's one bit, I think she says to him, "Oh, you should go on one of those holidays where you meet similar people." And he says, "Like Club Med." And she says, "I was thinking more Saga." And you've got a lot of this sort of barbed interplay, which I think actually solves your problem of whether it's not up to you to decide whether you can write women. Other people have to have to judge it.
Yes.
But that's basically how you've addressed it. I'll tell you I thought the other best character. Now I liked all the characters, but the other best character is the first victim. Selena Moriarty. I loved her. She's abrasive, dishonest. She's professionally unethical. Sexually, she's polymorphically promiscuous. Is she based on somebody you know, Chris?
They're all autobiographical, obviously.
Oh, she's you.
A number of colleagues have asked, are the characters based on people you know? Answer, absolutely, unequivocally, no. The only character that is remotely resembles anyone I know is the main character, the first person narrator, and there are profound differences between my own autobiography and Sirius Peabody's autobiography. I mean, the point about him is that it's my voice through his character, and that's plain to everybody who's ever spoken to me. And he looks, I assume, a bit like me, but I don't know any of the others. The others are all completely fictitious, just conjured up out of my imagination.
Before we finish, I want to just reference. I thought my favourite joke, not necessarily the funniest, but my favourite joke in the book is a gag about Schrodinger's cat, where Peabody suggests that until the crime is solved, the suspects are both guilty and innocent at the same time. The suspects are sort of smeared out across the various statuses, and I thought that stands for it's almost a synecdoche for the whole book. But finally, I just wanted to put that in. Finally, does anybody ever write a book these days without thinking, what would it look like on television or in the movies? Have you cast it? Do you know who's going to play what?
No, I haven't thought of that. To me, the most interesting part of it is, decoherence. I came across the word decoherence reading one of the quantum physics books, and I read the various definitions of decoherence, and it just seemed to me such a fantastic description of people's lives in the microcosm bumping into the macrocosm of events that and being swallowed up by them. I came across the word entanglement, and I just thought, what a great word, because it has this element of relationship and mystery, but equally it's a quantum physics term for what happens to two particles at a great distance. The words entropy. What a concept to describe our lives. And yet it's a quantum physics, basically, concept.
Peabody says at one point in the book, entropy, that's what this is all about. And of course,
yes, it is. Our experience of life, our experience of the flow of time is basically what entropy is about. And as you get older, as I undoubtedly am, you think so much about the passage of time and the flow of time. We've tended to see it like I said at the beginning, in liberal arts terms. Oh, it's a river, and along it we flow, or it's the sea, or it's something that's visual and artistic and expressionistic in that way. But in actual fact, the language and the lexicon of science is there for us, and not enough people use it. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to use life as a metaphor for science. And whether I succeeded or not is up to, the great public.
Well, in this case, me. And I really enjoyed it. So, we've been talking about Decoherence, A Quantum Whodunit by Chris Kirkham, which is published by Wallace Publishing. If you want a hard copy like I've got, it's £8.99, but you get an ebook on Amazon for £1.99. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.
That was Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Books Podcast is a Green Shoot production. You can find out more at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be contacted on tim@green-shoot.com.